Love Tucker.
Let your winners ride.
Rain Man David Sachs.
And instead, we open source it to the fans, and they've just gone crazy with it.
Love you, West. Queen of Quinoa.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the number one podcast in the world after Tucker Carlson's amazing podcast. That's right. Tucker is back here on the All-In podcast with Chamath Palihapitiya, your chairman dictator, and the czar, David Sachs. Not from the White House, he's from the suite, but he's here back on the program looking great. Look at the collar. Brioni. I ordered 3 or 4 Brionis after last week's show.
There
Guys, I did. I'm getting the brony. Well, I have the all-in expense accounts now.
What'd you call it? Brony? Brioni.
He'll be paying for it over 72 months.
2 monthly payments.
The layaway.
You use Affirm or Klarna to pay for that?
Hey, Tucker, last time you were here, you famously, gosh, it's been a year of feedback on your last performance. Thank you for coming back. We got a lot of crazy feedback from the private equity housewives, but I got more feedback.
I bet you did. They love me.
Yeah, but you know what? You're in deep. You're in deep because I am here in LA, and the Los Angeles studio wives group is really, really pissed off at you because they feel that they're the problem. They feel they're a much bigger problem than private equity housewives. So Hollywood studio heads' wives versus private equity wives.
I know some of them, and they're absolutely a bigger problem, but there are fewer of them.
Got it.
It's
So
kind of
pound
hard
for
to get
pound.
critical mass. Yeah, exactly. They're a smaller threat. They're kind of an elite unit. You know what I mean? They're like Delta Force.
They have less money, too. You know, they don't get as much in the divorce as these private equity wives.
Got it. So they're coming in like a SWAT team. If you want to send them in to deal with a very specific issue, great. But they're not going to cause as much bedlam globally as the private equity.
They cause a lot of misery, though.
As one Mackenzie Bezos.
Exactly.
Oh my God. All right, listen. Let's get a plug in here. All-In Summit, 4th year. Tucker's coming this year, I hope. September 7th to 9th in Los Angeles. The goal, have the world's most important conversations, yada, yada, yada. Blah, blah, blah. Apply for a ticket. allin.com/yada, yada, yada, or allin.com/summit to apply for a ticket. Freeberg is out this week. So Tucker is here. And my Lord, a lot going on in the news. Let's start with the immigration protests / riots / ICE actions in Los Angeles. I'm actually here. Last Friday, protests broke out after ICE raided Home Depot, a fashion wholesaler. In total, 44 people were arrested by ICE, 10 times as many, 400 and counting, from the protests. They even ran into, ICE that is, ran into a strawberry field in Oxnard to just randomly pick people up, it seems. At least a half dozen Waymos were vandalized and burned, 20-plus businesses looted. And Waymo narrowed their area, and it's spiked to 30-minute wait times. So that's a first-world problem. Rioters throwing bricks, Molotov cocktails, shooting fireworks at law enforcement, completely unacceptable. 2 men were charged with throwing Molotov cocktails at officers. Trump deployed the National Guard, 2,000 at first, then 4,000 apparently. And apparently there's a battalion of Marines here, 700 of them. Karen Bass instituted a curfew downtown LA, 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. And prosecutors, federal prosecutors that is, are trying to identify hundreds of people. Newsom, Bass denounced the raids, obviously. And they're blaming Trump for escalating the situation. Trump and members of the White House responded by calling out California's weak leadership. And now we have protests popping up everywhere else. New York, Chicago, Austin, D.C. Tucker, you grew up in Southern California, I think.
I did, yeah. L.A. and La Jolla.
I mean, are these riots more or less than a Lakers championship? How concerning are they to you? Who's to blame?
Well, as measured by violence, they're less profound than, what happened in 2020 after George Floyd died. They're way less dangerous than, say, the Watts riot or the Rodney King riots in L.A., but they're much more profound. I mean, it really does. There's certainly a bigger deal than anything that happened in Fort Sumter, for sure, which kicked off the bloodiest war in American history. The federal government has, as a core duty, the right and responsibility to enforce immigration law and police the borders. That's what the government is. That's what the federal government is, really. And so if you contest that, it is like a threat to disunion fundamentally. I mean, I think there's a lot at stake. And we reached this point because a series of paradoxically weak federal governments allowed sanctuary cities to continue literally for decades, each one its own form of insurrection against the central government. And maybe you don't believe that the federal government has a right to pass laws restricting immigration. It's not in charge of the integrity of the borders. That's a kind of philosophical or constitutional case I guess you could make. But most people accept that those are federal duties. And once you accept that, you can't allow states or municipalities to flout the law any more than you could allow Central High School in Little Rock to keep black students out or whatever. I mean, certainly federal troops have been called in for much less. And I think the longer this continues, the greater the threat of disunion, the greater the threat of reaching a point where you can't drive from New York to LA. We take a lot for granted in the country. And the main thing we take for granted, I think, is freedom of movement between states. But you could easily imagine that ending, like soon, in the same way that you can't drive from, because I've tried, from Sao Paulo to Rio in Brazil, pretty first world country. It's too dangerous to do that. You could easily see that happening here. So I think once the Trump administration commits to putting down the riots, to enforcing federal law by force, it kind of can't back away from that. And that raises the question of who's funding these, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's a really interesting question. We should find out. I don't think the only arrest should be on the scene. I do think the drug cartels are involved, flexing their authority in California. They have a lot of control in California, as I'm sure you know, et cetera, et cetera. But the bottom line question is, does the federal government have a right to enforce federal immigration law? Yes. And if states are out of compliance with that, it doesn't have any option but to force the issue.
Chamath, when you see this amount of paramilitary, literal military coming in, the dragging of, handymen from Home Depot, as opposed to the strategic way this started, which was, hey, we're going to go after the felons, we're going after the gang members, the really bad folks. And then this time now it seems like, hey, we're just going to roll up to a farm. We're going to roll up to a Home Depot, just grab everybody. We'll figure it out later if their, papers check out or not. Are you in favor of the, hey, all 20 million got to go? I'll call that the Steve Bannon position. Or are you in the 5% of illegal aliens who are criminals? They need to go, but maybe a path to citizenship for the other 19 million.
I think the president was asked a version of that question today, Jason. And I think what he said is there are people that have worked, for example, on farms for 20 to 25 years, or they work in the leisure industry. And he said, we have to take a common sense approach to those people. Because if you do take those people, then it's creating a vacuum where these jobs could get filled by folks that are essentially criminals or other things. So I believe that that's a reasonable starting point. What I would say is, where do we go? There are 7.5 legal, not illegal, legal immigrants in the United States waiting for their adjustment of status. Those are doctors, those are lawyers, those are scientists, those are family members of existing American citizens. There's an entire body of people that I think we have to recognize that have been waiting in line, and their first act in America was a legal action to come in and contribute. And every time we start this conversation, we go to the plight of people whose fundamental first action was an illegal action without understanding that there has to be actually a more balanced approach. So, yes, I think the president is right. Common sense for the folks that have now been here for a very long time. But we have to prioritize the people that started by saying, we're going to wait in line properly. And then there's people in the middle. But I think that there needs to be a way to give those folks a chance to get their affairs in order, but they should be playing by the rules.
Got it.
And I think it's unfair to reward not playing by the rules.
Okay, so some middle ground between the extreme, all 20 million got to go, and the...
One example that I saw online, Jason, was give folks a stipend and a year.
Yes, the stipend's been out there for a while, right? Yeah.
To get their affairs in order.
Yeah.
And then to
Kaizen said that, right?
Kaizen said that, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think Kaizen's clip is actually the most rational for the middle chunk. But I would really focus on these legal folks and say, what are we doing about those folks whose first action was to raise their hand, stand in line, and say, I want to contribute by the rules that America sets up.
So reward them and then punish the illegal folks coming in.
Adjudicate everybody else.
Or adjudicate everybody else. Love it. Okay, Sax, I'm going to play 2 clips for here to level this up, and we can kind of look at this in a multi-decade way. Here's Reagan on immigration, and then followed by Clinton.
It is bold men and women yearning for freedom and opportunity who leave their homelands and come to a new country to start their lives over. They believe in the American dream, and over they make it come true for themselves, for their children, and for others. But their greatest contribution is more than economic, because they understand in a special way how glorious it is to be an American. They renew our pride and gratitude in the United States of America, the greatest, freest nation in the world, the last best hope of man on earth.
All Americans, not only in the states most heavily affected, but in every place in this country, are rightly disturbed by the large numbers of illegal aliens entering our country. That's why our administration has moved aggressively to secure our borders more, by hiring a record number of new border guards, by deporting twice as many criminal aliens as ever before. We are a nation of immigrants, but we are also a nation of laws. It is wrong and ultimately self-defeating for a nation of immigrants to permit the kind of abuse of our immigration laws we have seen in recent years, and we must do more to stop it.
Okay, Sax, my question for you is, on a party basis, this seems to have flipped. We talked about this before on the program. Republicans wanted immigration, NAFTA, legal, even maybe an open border where workers could go freely back and forth from Mexico, kind of like the EU. And Clinton wanted to deport folks so that Americans could have more jobs and that wages would go up. Now it seems to have flipped. Obviously, you're inside the administration. Disclaimer, however you want to disclaim this. What's in the best interest of all Americans going forward? Because we have an interesting wrinkle here, which I'm sure you've been thinking about as the AI czar, which is jobs are going away in a lot of key areas where robotics and AI are coming in. So you have to contend with what the American people want and AI and job destruction or displacement that can be caused by it. So what are your thoughts generally? And obviously you work in the administration, so I want to give you that chance to explain personal versus administration position.
Well, my reaction is that you're doing everything possible to avoid the fact that LA is on fire right now and law enforcement is being assaulted by rioters who look like an invading army. They're rioting under a foreign flag. Yeah, you're showing clips of Reagan and Clinton. What the hell does this have to do with the fact that there are riots in LA right now?
Oh, well, I was trying
This is the issue at hand.
Oh, I was trying to level up the conversation to talk about the big picture of immigration. But if we want to get down to
changing the conversation, I think that,
I'm trying to expand it. But hold on. If you're going to accuse me personally of like having a scale here, I'm happy to discuss law enforcement, January 6th, or this one. I believe you should not beat up cops. I come from a family of cops. You know that. We've been friends for over 20 years. My family is cop. My family is firefighter. We don't approve of throwing Molotov cocktails at cops, period, full stop. I am insulted if you even insinuate that.
I didn't insinuate that, but
you said
we have not discussed the issue at hand, which is
you can
the
feel
fact
free
that
to go
LA
micro.
Is burning right now. By the way, if you don't want to get deported, try not rioting under a foreign flag. I mean, it's just a stupid way to advocate for your position if that's what it is. But that's the topic of the week right now. I don't know why you're trying to up-level this and talk about what Reagan thought 40 years ago. It's just not relevant to what's happening in the news today. Now, you asked, what is the quote-unquote American position, if there is one? I can give you some polling on that. So first of all, voters approve of the ICE raids in Los Angeles by 55 to 37. That's plus 18. Voters support the administration's effort to deport illegal immigrants by 58-37. That's plus 21. They approve of Trump deploying the National Guard by 20 points, 59-39. Only 36% say the administration's gone too far, while 55% say it's about right or too little, so plus 19. And even the liberal Quinnipiac poll found that Democrats' approval numbers are at a new all-time low of minus 49, whereas Trump is now up to plus 6 in Morning Consult and plus 8 in Rasmussen. So I think the American people approve of what the administration is doing here. And just to fact check, one thing you said in the introduction, you mentioned this fashion wholesaler that along with Home Depot, you made it sound like these raids were just happening willy-nilly, like there's some big roundup where they were just busting into places and seeing who's illegal, checking people's papers. That's not what happened. This fashion wholesaler is a money laundering operation for the Mexican cartels. This is according to Tom Homan. And many employees there are involved in very serious crimes, drug, gang, and violence, murder, child rape. And there were warrants for their arrest. So the way that this whole thing started is ICE was serving criminal warrants that state and local authorities have no right to resist. That's how this started. It wasn't random roundups. Okay.
There's reporting that Stephen Miller specifically said he was disappointed with the number of people being round up and deported. And he said, just go to a farm, just go to Home Depot. So that's the reporting.
Okay. Well, I have not been able to confirm that reporting. I personally don't believe it. I think that what Tom Homan said is that they were serving criminal warrants. That's how this started.
Okay.
Now, I think that part of the reason why the Democrats are so unpopular here is they're basically perceived as excusing the lawlessness by saying that it's only happening because the Trump administration is daring to enforce the law. And so once again, they're siding with looters, arsonists, and violent criminals, just like in 2020. And
who's siding with
This
them?
is Democrats.
Okay, because the Democrats, they said no violence. So that was many times Gavin Newsom said no violence. Karen Bass said no violence. They've been tweeting that
They
constantly.
also, okay, great. They also are saying that this is all Trump's fault, that Trump started this. Bass and Newsom said that the National Guard wasn't needed because LAPD had everything under control. But LAPD was at first told to stay out of the protests. And when the violence erupted and that forced them to step in, they were, according to their own chief of police, Jim McDonnell, quickly overwhelmed. So this is McDonnell. He said, quote, "We are overwhelmed. Tonight, we had individuals out there shooting commercial-grade fireworks at our officers that can kill you. They'll take backpacks filled with cinder blocks and hammers, break the blocks, and pass the piece around to throw at officers and cars, even at other people." So according to their own chief of police, they needed the help from the National Guard. So that's the real issue here, is that Bass and Newsom had this policy of doing nothing and then engaging in denialism, pretending like there wasn't a problem. And then when the problem got too big to ignore, they pretend like it's Trump's fault for causing it.
Tucker, what's your thoughts on should the Trump administration have had such a show of force? If the reports are true that they're randomly going, to a Home Depot, if that is true, is that the right approach right now? Or is it, a little too provocative and they should do this more strategically, in your personal opinion?
Well, considering that we have American troops in over 100 bases around the world in countries most Americans can't identify, it's a little weird to be shocked when, on that rare occasion, they're used to keep the second biggest city in the country from burning down. It seems like the point of having a military is to keep foreigners from burning your cities. And these are foreigners, as David said. They're foreign nationals committing crimes beneath a foreign flag. So that if there was ever a time to use the U.S. military, it's then. And as noted earlier, you can't allow the states to be flagrantly out of compliance with federal immigration law. And I have to say, the core question for me as an American is really a fairness question. So the idea that, people are breaking the law, but it's cool because they're doing essential services. Like, well, I pay a lot in taxes. Maybe I pay 80% and that feels like enough to me. And hey, man, do you really have a right to collect the last 20%? I mean, isn't 80% enough? Like, back off. I don't have the right to say that as an American citizen to an IRS agent. I wind up in jail if I do that, or if I break any law, by the way. So
rule of law, critically important.
Well, but not only that, it's a double standard. And I live in a place where a lot of the population subsists on food banks and where there are very few jobs. And it really is one of those places that NAFTA destroyed, whose economy NAFTA destroyed. And to see in the place where I live, immigrants get preference on housing, on jobs, which is actually true. And I know that liberals watch and be like, that's not really true. It is true, actually. And I wonder, because the real number is not 20 million, it's closer to 50 million. I think that's true. Illegals in the United States. Clearly, they can't all be deported by ICE. But I also think if you have a system that hands out meaningful grants, in effect, cell phones, travel vouchers, housing vouchers, free education, food stamps, to people who are here legally or who are here legally as refugees, you are going to draw the world's poor. And I think it's fair to ask, do we want that? How do we benefit from that? And are we giving more to foreigners than we're giving to our own citizens? And the answer is yes. And like, how dare you at a certain point? Like, you get a revolution if you keep doing that. That's too much. It's too offensive.
Got it. So I think we all agree, no violence on cops, shut the southern border, and giving a
Jake,
crazy amount of...
Hold on, let me just finish. You think the National Guard shouldn't have been brought in? You like me ask questions, don't you? Do you think the National Guard should be brought in? Yes or no?
If the local police can't handle what's going on, of course they should be brought in. Sure. I believe that
Bass and Newsom are questioning that decision.
You asked me the question. I believe they should have been brought in for January 6th, for BLM, or for the LA riots if the local police can't contain them. 100%, I believe the National Guard should have been brought in for January 6th when they were beating cops. I believe they should be brought in now if cops are being beaten. And I believe they should have been brought in during BLM when cops were being beaten. I am pro-cop. I come from a family of cops. So you can ask me the question 7 different ways.
So Newsom and Bass were out of line when they say that the National Guard should not have been brought in.
I think, well, number one, I think they should call the National Guard if they can't control it. I'm not
but
on the ground.
But that's their criticism of Trump, is that he called in the National Guard. You agree that that was necessary. It's obviously necessary. Just look at the TV. The city's still on fire. The cops are completely overwhelmed. By the way, I find it comical that...
Well, you're not letting me finish the sentence.
Well, let me finish this one point. Then you can speak.
Yeah.
I find it comical that...
For permission.
The Massachusetts governor called up the National Guard when DeSantis sent... Remember when he sent the 50 migrants over to Martha's Vineyard?
Yes.
And they all freaked out. And they literally called the National Guard in because 50 migrants all of a sudden have been flown into Martha's Vineyard.
Yeah, they did, yeah.
Okay, but
was that
you can have thousands
them, or because there was riots?
Well, that was when DeSantis was making a point about.
Okay, but that was to process them. They weren't rioting on Martha's Vineyard. These were just
nonetheless. The National Guard was brought in, and you can have thousands of people though rioting in L.A., but somehow the National Guard shouldn't be brought in.
We're in agreement, so you can try to force me to disagree with you, but I'm in agreement. Anytime the cops are overwhelmed, I think the National Guard should be brought in. Period. Full stop. So we're in agreement on that. What I'm trying to get to is, Tucker, if you believe there's 50 million people, let's say the number's 30 million. We split the difference between the two, 35 million, whatever it is. My question for you, how many should be deported by ICE at $20,000 a person, which is the estimate that, both sides seem to agree is what it's going to cost? Should we deport 1 million? Should we deport 10 million? And then how, Tucker Carlson, would you deport them?
Well, I think the goal has to be full compliance with the law for everybody within our borders, citizen or foreign-born, illegal, refugee, green card holder. If you're in the United States, you obey our laws. And if you don't, we make a good faith effort to enforce them, despite how powerful the political blocs
so you're all 50 million.
So by definition, or else why wouldn't I apply that same standard to my taxes, right? So but how do you do it?
Of course, citizenship. Yeah, let's get into that. Yeah.
Right. So, that's a hostage situation. It's like we've got 50 million here already. We've lied about the number for 30 years now. Wow, it's 50 million or 35 million. We need them. Everyone gets a path to citizenship. That's a kind of crime, actually. But the first step, and the phrase has been devalued, but self-deportation, if you have a system where people come to the United States to make their own way and take advantage of the freedoms offered in the economy, and they're allowed to participate in the economy, then I think you could have a system where people really admire immigrants in the way that they did when I was growing up, and that I still do in some ways. I mean, so my favorite people are immigrants, and they all tell the same story. Came here with nothing, built this great life, but you make everybody cynical, and you sort of destroy the idea of the virtue of immigration when you hand people 100%. Stuff and give them preference 100%. When they arrive. And we don't talk enough about what that actually looks like. We spend a lot more than 20 grand a person right now in subsidies to people who aren't even allowed to be here.
And they also pay into Social Security too, right? To the tune of 100 billion years.
Oh, okay. Right.
No, that's just what was reported by our government. If we want to get conspiracy corner, that's not true.
I think those are fake. I think those are fake numbers. Look, does anybody really believe that 50 million illegals is a net benefit to the U.S. economy? Are you serious? Have you been to our cities? No, of course not. It's not.
I actually think probably a large number of them are a net benefit because they're working in jobs that Americans don't want to take, and we're at 4% unemployment. So who's going to take all those jobs if they get deported, Tucker?
But weren't you just saying that we're on the cusp of a labor revolution where some 20% of American jobs are going away in 2 years?
Well, that could be. Yeah. So that's the nuance in this discussion. Is 5 years ago we might be actually dealing with labor disruption.
It's like a brick wall we're about to hit at high speed, and I don't understand having accustomed an entire generation of tens of millions of immigrants to government handouts. what the social fabric is going to look like when that stops.
Yeah, can I say something? Because
Yeah, please,
I think
get in here, Jamal.
Tucker's saying something really important, which I agree with. What should immigration be in a highly developed nation like the United States? And my perspective is you have to come and say, well, what is the goal? I think the goal should be to maintain supremacy. The United States is the most vibrant economy in the world. It's the most important military power in the world. It's the most technically advanced entity in the world. If we do not focus on maintaining our supremacy, I don't think any American wants to go through the process of going from first to not first. And if you look back in history at all of the other countries that have had to go through that transition, that is where revolutions and chaos happen. So we should avoid that. So where does immigration play a role? It needs to play a role first and foremost in technical, military, and economic supremacy. The problem, as Tucker says, is when you have 5 or 6 times the number of illegal immigrants as legal immigrants, all of a sudden the idea of using immigration as a cream skimming technique to reinforce the most capable people in the world to come here goes away because you can't have that conversation. We have people languishing for 10, 15, 20 years on visas. Okay. Their kids age out. They all go back to India and other places. Why? Because we can't focus on that conversation, Jason, because we're focused on how do we give amnesty to folks whose initial action was breaking the law.
Absolutely correct.
And this is where the whole immigration conversation devolves. We are missing the bigger picture. And you need to deal, one second, you need to deal with the illegal immigration thing in an extremely foundational way where you can defend the decision. You started illegally and you have to now go and conform to the law.
Which is where I'm trying to steer this discussion. Number one, we all agree on closing the border. It seems like there's a breaking consensus here. Tucker wants to eventually deport everybody. You want to do something in the middle like Trump. Sachs, I'm not sure what your personal position is or if you want to give it. Do you feel we should try to have a path to deport as many of these 20, 30 million as possible? Or do you believe we should have a path towards citizenship for them? What is your personal belief, or do you want to not give
Well,
it?
I remember when you asked that question to now Vice President J.D. Vance at All-In Summit, and he said that you basically address that problem the same way that you eat a sandwich, which is one bite at a time. So that makes sense to me. If there's 20 million illegals, you start with the top million who are violent criminals and gang members, and you deport those. And that is what ICE was doing. They were serving criminal warrants. And then after you successfully do that, then you see where you're at and you can address the next bite of the sandwich. That makes sense to me. Now, look, I think that we're not really addressing a really core part of the issue here, which is for a couple of decades now, conservatives were demonized, and Tucker in particular, I think you were demonized, for warning about the policies that have created the mess that everyone can see on TV right now. And that mess is we have a large unassimilated population of military-age males who are basically rioting right now under a foreign flag as if they were foreign invaders. We basically have allowed a separatist movement in the United States. That's what it looks like to me. And I remember when Tucker was warning about the policies that might create this on his show for years, you know, virtually alone, probably alone on Fox News. You know, you were called a racist. This was great replacement theory, blah, blah, blah. How can everyone not look at what's happening on TV right now and say, Tucker was right? You know, that was really dumb. And look, I say this as someone from a family. I'm one of the people that Ronald Reagan was talking about. You know, my family and I came over here. We're immigrants, but we came over here to assimilate. You know, we believe in the melting pot. That's all good. You
might get canceled for bringing up the melting pot. That's
no, the melting pot's good. I mean, I think that was the classic American model.
Melting pot is totally good. You speak the language.
I'm just saying you could get canceled for even invoking
That's what you're
it.
supposed to do. Like, why would anybody? I came here because I wanted to be American and everything that American meant. If I was bigger, I would have played football. You know, like there's all these things that I would have done to assimilate more and more. I believe in the culture of the United States. That's why people should come.
Right. So we came here, we assimilated, you know, high skill immigrants, didn't have a lot, but had good education and willing to assimilate. That's very different than what you're seeing on TV right now. And again, if the people on TV just wanted to protest immigration policy in the way that you're talking about, I mean, you're describing it in this like very nice, genteel way, they would be peacefully protesting under an American flag, saying, we want to be here. We're willing to contribute.
I think the issue
That's not what's happening. You can see that, right? I mean, they look like foreign invaders.
I would say,
by the way, this is like the dumbest PR that, you know, if this debate is really about immigration, this is like the dumbest way for them to present their side of the argument.
Yeah.
Because who wants to keep in this country a large unassimilated population that is proud to march, not just march, but actually protest and riot and burn and assault under the flag of another nation?
I would say dollars to donuts.
That's an intolerable situation.
The majority of the people who are doing the looting and rioting are not actually immigrants because they have the ability to be deported. The people who are doing that are the bad actors that we saw during BLM, the bad actors that we saw, you know, in LA when the Lakers win. I've lived here for a decade and I am here right now. I can tell you it's contained. And those 80, 90% of those people are not the immigrants. The immigrants are hiding right now for fear of being deported. But let's sort of talk about the path. Well, where do you guys want to go with it here? I mean, I can give you my opinion if you want.
Well, Tucker, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I want to speak for you, but I mean, I do think that like Tucker should feel vindicated on this issue for speaking about it for so many years.
You feel vindicated?
I mean, I never doubted it. I was born in California in 1969, and my family got there in 1850. I have some sense of what the state was like, certainly through my childhood, and it was idyllic, and it's not. You know, the rich areas are great. Bel Air is great. La Jolla is still great, I think. I mean, there are Mount Shasta is great. Lots of great places in California, but fundamentally, the state is a slum. It's a Latin American country, and immigration did that. And I say that as someone who is pretty pro-immigrant, actually. My best friend's an immigrant. I mean, I've always admired, liked immigrants. I'm hardly anti-immigrant or anti-immigration, but the way we did it destroyed the state. Immigration is what made California into a slum, and there's kind of no way around that. And so that's not an argument against all immigration. I'm not making that argument. I don't feel that way. But it's an argument against what we did in California. And rather than learn from that, we're doing it in every other state. And I don't know why. And I think, you know, if the other side had a reasonable argument, they would proffer it. But instead, they call you names and try to turn you into some kind of thought criminal or whatever. I don't care, obviously. But it's a sort of measure of how little they have to say in response. They're not actually trying to make the country better. That's kind of the main thing. I have always thought immigrants are great because they did make the country better, right? I mean, I think that's demonstrable. But the people pushing our current policies don't have that as a goal. This is a kind of punishment for something. And a lot of it's ethnic, actually. It's a kind of attack on the people who were born here. I don't know where that hostility comes from. You can feel it, though. And I think it's foolish to deny it. That is a motive. They're trying to hurt the people who live here. And I live in a place currently where I see that happening. And it drives me totally bonkers. And the last thing I'll say is, if you think the way we once did immigration was good, and a lot of immigrants are awesome people, and I do think that, this is discrediting all immigration.
100%.
And it's turning people into pretty radical immigration restrictionists, or like, look, I don't want any more immigrants.
Yeah.
You know, that's inevitable, but it's sad to see it.
By the way, what you're saying is the most true for immigrants. Legal immigrants look at illegal immigration even more negatively than native-born Americans.
Which makes sense, right? I mean, they waited in line and other people didn't. You would be really upset if somebody cut the line.
Jason, what do you think?
Obviously, there's a lot of emotion around this issue. I think numbers help. And I always look to see what is the consensus amongst the group here and amongst, you know, Americans. Everybody wants the border closed. Trump won on that. So, okay, we all agree the border should be closed. I think 80, 90% consensus in that. 80, 90% of Americans think we should deport violent criminals. Okay, we got consensus there. So then what's left is, what do we do with high-skilled recruiting? I like to use the word recruiting, and we had that discussion with President Trump here. He promised to put a green card on every degree. I agree with him on that. I think we should be recruiting at least 1 million or 2 million amazing people per year. 1 to 2 million amazing people. We should match that to what the needs of the country are. If we need energy, if we need doctors, we should match that. Where we probably disagree is, I think, the Democrats and the Republicans share equally in this issue that was created that Tucker pointed out. Yes, there are 40, 30, 50, who knows what the exact number is. That's part of the problem. Here's a chart we made. This just shows you under each of the last, 50, almost 50 years of presidents, how many people net immigrated to the country. And as you can see, it's been pretty consistent, around 3 million per. And Clinton and Bush had a ton of immigration. Both Bushes were paid for. A lot of their donations came from corporates who wanted free migration. America created this. Hold on, let me finish my thought.
There's an outlier here, Jason, though.
Well, yeah, Biden is the huge outlier. We all agree on that. Biden let it go YOLO. And I understand people have a lot of resentment for that, and rightfully so. And if you bring in 10 million people, you're going to get a lot of bad guys. But you put this all together. My belief is that this is a country of immigrants and that this country does great when hardworking immigrants assimilate. I think we should take this raw firepower of these incredible immigrants who have been here for decades. If you've been here for 10 or 20 decades, pay a fine, pay some extra taxes, and we give these people a path to citizenship, and we recruit the top 1 to 2 million people. That's my belief.
You do that before or after the people that have been waiting in line get a fair shake?
I think I would start...
Before or after?
I think you have to do it before, because we created this. And I know that that's not something that people want to take ownership of, but America created the situation. Bush created it, Reagan created it, Clinton. America, really? Yes, the country that we live in. Our government allowed millions of people here, and the Republicans did this specifically in order to get cheap labor.
Okay, let me ask you.
Let me be very
specific.
responsible for what we did with these people.
Let's just say that you're an international... Let's just say you're an international mathematics Olympiad winner. Mm-hmm. You get recruited to come to the United States on a student visa. You crush it. Let's say you go to MIT, and then you go and do a PhD at Caltech, and then you get recruited on an OPT visa by Google, and you're just crushing.
Awesome.
And you're saying that person...
Oh, no, sorry. That's a more subtle question. That person we should recruit, as I said very clearly, the top 1 to 2 million.
They're currently waiting in line, Jason.
Yes.
So let's just say...
I'm saying, yes, let them in. And yes, a path to...
Who do you prioritize? You have one ICE officer.
You can do both at the same time. No, you don't.
You can't.
Of course you can. We could have one group recruiting 1 million to 2 million highly skilled individuals of the type you're describing, while having another group. We can do two things at the same time, Chamath. Absolutely, you can. You're giving a false question here. Then we take the person who's been here for 20 years as a dishwasher, as a nanny, who has been an amazing citizen, who has been paying into Social Security, give them a path, a compassionate path. And we as America and Americans should take ownership of the fact that we allowed this, and the people who allowed it were Republicans and Democrats. We allowed these people to come in to work in our restaurants and fields, which is what Trump said today. Trump is in agreement with me.
That's not what he said. He said something different.
He said he wants to not have those people leave.
It's just amazing to me that on this podcast during the Biden years, you were echoing this party line that the videos of, mass migration, caravans streaming across the border, going through the holes in the wall. You said those were videos cherry picked by Fox News. You echoed the party line that there was no problem. Now all of a sudden you're saying it was a bipartisan problem.
No, fact check. I said we don't know because we don't have the metrics, and we don't have a good system, which we all agree on. There's no good system to count these people.
Anybody who went down to the border was saying that it was wide open.
Right. And as we got that data, I said this data on the ground shows we should shut the border. That's always been my position.
You suddenly became very empirical about the issue.
I've always been empirical about it, and I've also been compassionate about it.
This whole both sides are to blame thing kind of ignores the fact that you had the Trump revolution in 2016. There is some truth to the idea that both parties neglected the problem. If you go back far enough, Tucker will remember this, when Bob Bartley was the editor of the Wall Street Journal op-ed page, they actually supported a constitutional amendment in favor of open borders. I mean, they really believed in this whole idea of free trade, open borders, free flow of capital and labor. Okay. But that was a long time ago. And, with the rise of Trump in 2015, 2016, it became a different party. Trump got elected on building a wall.
Yep.
And what happened? The Democrats fought him tooth and nail. They tied him up in litigation. He was able to build hundreds of miles of wall, but there were uncompleted parts of it. And when Biden came into office, there were large pieces of the wall that were still on the ground just waiting to be erected. And Biden sold them off as scrap metal for 2 cents on the dollar. Do you remember this? And then
Absolutely.
Biden and the Democrats proceeded.
I have been in favor
hold on a
of
second. They
legal immigration and closing the border. So please don't frame it as I'm against that.
Okay, just forget about you. You said Democrats and Republicans are to blame for this. Not in the last
40 years.
Not in the last 8 years. No.
Oh yeah,
Trump,
no. Biden
Trump
is the outlier.
wanted a wall.
Yeah, Biden is the outlier. Yeah.
Opened up the border, and Democrats supported him in that, and they thwarted every Republican attempt to close the border.
And they
for 3
lost.
years. Hold on a second. For 3 years, they gaslit and pretended it wasn't a problem. Then, when it became undeniable, they claimed that Biden didn't have the executive authority, so they would need a new act of Congress. That was also total nonsense. As Trump said in the State of the Union, you didn't need a new law, you just need a new president. Look, if you want to go back 20 or 30 years, you can blame both parties. If you want to talk about the last 8 years, there's only one party to blame. One party, the Democrats. And that is why you look at the polling right now, Democrats, their party, all-time low. It is, let's get the exact number, negative 49. 21% approve of Democrats, 70% disapprove. Because they know that Democrats caused this problem, and Democrats are the ones denying, they're the ones basically making excuses for the disorder and the chaos right now. The only Democrat who's actually talking sense right now is the one with the head injury, ironically, Fetterman. He's a lone voice here. I want to pull up this quote.
Don't make fun of his head
it's kind of funny.
Dude, that's just
it's amazing.
Come
like
on.
Fetterman. No, I mean, it's kind of sad, but look, I'm agreeing with Fetterman. Fetterman says,
with the caveat that he hit his head.
I don't know what it is about Democrats. I don't know what it is about Democrats. It takes a head injury for them to talk sense. Okay, it's like a Bulworth thing. Anyway, Fetterman said, "My party loses the moral high ground when we refuse to condemn setting cars on fire, destroying buildings, and assaulting law enforcement."
Yes, he's talking about January 6th.
I unapologetically stand for free speech, peaceful demonstrations, and immigration, but this is not that. This is anarchy and true chaos. So kudos to Fetterman, but he's the only Democrat out there. He's a lone voice condemning the violence.
And Tucker's our guest. I'm going to give Tucker the last word on this topic before we go on to the next one. And you are 100% correct. Biden, 10 million net immigrants, and Trump, 3 million, which sounds like a lot, but is actually the lowest in like 10 administrations, the lowest since Reagan. Tucker, you're our guest. Wrap us up here. What should we think?
I think that we should measure the health of a country, at least in part, by the condition of its cities, including the cleanliness of its cities. And by that measure, our country is collapsing. Our cities are a disaster. And the richest part of the richest cities are fine, and the rest of them are just absolutely awful. And so I think that has got to be just job one. If you want to renew the United States, you have to make sure its population centers are clean, safe, orderly, but especially clean. There's something really important. And I know that the left just instinctively discounts that, but cleanliness is next to godliness. And your city is a reflection of your self-respect, how you feel about your nation, your patriotism. And if you allow it to become like Paris or New York, covered in graffiti and filth and random people from other countries selling fruit on the street and begging and having sex in ATM vestibules and just like the whole Midtown Manhattan, Central Paris experience, like that's a sign your civilization is going under. I think it's really, really important. And I do think, that decay is not entirely caused by mass immigration, but mass immigration has made it much worse. And I just know that from walking around because I like to walk around cities. I think it's a national emergency, and the riots are just the most florid expression of that. A burning car is something you can't ignore, but we do ignore the condition of 6th Avenue at 49th Street. Like, how can or the condition of Penn Station or, of our airports? Like, how can we allow that? So if I were in charge, I would make, you go to Dubai or Doha or Moscow or someplace that has a sense of itself.
Soba, when we got soba in Tokyo, remember 2 years ago, and we were talking about this exact issue. It just
but it's true.
Yes.
Tokyo is the most radicalizing experience for an American. Everyone who goes there is like, I can't even deal with this. I'm so angry that we've put up with what we're putting up with.
I had to talk you off the ledge in Tokyo.
You did, and let's not overthink it, I guess is what I'm saying. It's not even about the Constitution.
I like it. The city benchmark.
It's about litter.
Yes, we know the cornerstone is Christ alone, our hope now forever.